You happen to know your name? Okay. Oh, nice, Suzanne. Okay, call the meeting to order, 7 o'clock. I don't know, Kathy, do you have to make a? Do you make notes about who's here, or do we have to say who's here?
You should say who's here for the
Okay.
recording.
Dan, do you wanna? Make her here.
Tim Moore.
Frank Gallagher.
Tish Gallagher.
Alice Rio. Okay, so, first thing on the agenda is the review of the minutes of the last meeting. Did everybody get a chance to look them over?
Is
Not
there
really.
any way to get them
You know,
sooner than the
I don't-
day of?
I don't know why. I had sort of, memory that we had gotten them, but apparently we hadn't. I was maybe thinking about the month work. I don't know why. I had to ask Lisa to send them today because I assumed that she had sent them and she hadn't. So,
Yeah, I'll remind her again to send them to you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
yeah.
Well, it seems to be I know it happens with the Board of Health too.
Happens with
Get
the
'em
Them
tree
the day
commission as
of.
well.
the day
Okay.
of.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll
So
call
I
her.
think that's their routine, but if you're busy that day, you don't get them
Right,
in
right.
time.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So maybe we'll put off approving the minutes until everybody's had a chance to look them over, next month. We'll just
Okay.
table them for, is
You'll need a
Um,
motion.
that okay?
You need a motion.
Anyone make a motion? to
I
table?
move that we table them till next time, so we have time to read them.
Second.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, we'll do that. But I did go over this a little bit, and I wanted to talk about a couple of things because we had sort of agenda items to do. Gail is not here today, so there were some things that Gail was going to do. For instance, set up a meeting with Kevin Donnelly about the flooding issues, so we'll have to ask her about that. And Emily, I think you were going to look into a couple of funding sources. Did you do that? Or do you want to say something about that now or do it? Okay.
Whatever order you want to go in.
Well, let's put that off a little bit, but, and also Gail was gonna set up a meeting with Frank Cook, so we'll discuss that when she gets back next month. All right, so Gail, Antonina, Suzanne, myself, and Ryan, from AECom, were on a phone call with, Diane Gray, who's the state conservationist, and also with Ann Baldwin, who's obviously been our liaison there for the time since we've been dealing with the NRCS. And on the call, we welcomed Diane to Delaware. She was still in transition, and she seemed to be not quite anywhere right now. She seemed to be going through things at her desk and everything while we were talking. Not settled in her job, I would say. But what we did was we talked about the history of our town, the importance of it to the state, and the history of what we had gone through to request funding from the watershed project. She said that it was a very unsettled time, specifically because the federal budget had not been approved yet. It was one of those times when, we needed an extension and we were going to get an extension till after the election, that kind of thing. And she said, until the budget is settled, there's no way of knowing how much money is being allocated to these projects. And yes.
Do we know, if they continue to just do these short-term updates to the budget, like we'll approve it through, it's approved now through December or early January, I think. And then if they only approve it till March and then they, does that hold up things?
Sure.
I would think it does.
Probably, but I
rather
don't
than
think
an
that's
annual
I
budget.
don't think that actually happens. Eventually they do the budget. And I think, I don't think
She
we
made
do.
more of a note, if I may, Alice, that the transition due to the election would cause more of a holdup in the budget process than this short-term approval.
Right, yeah, we don't even know who's going to be the president, so we don't know, And that's
And
probably
then the
why the
changing of
budget
their
hasn't been
staff and
done yet.
everything.
Yeah, yeah. And also, you know, this involves the staffs of senators' offices and congressmen's offices and the whole thing. Now, something that she told us, which is disturbing to me, is that we are not talking about a fund for the state of Delaware that will be allocated based on what happens in Delaware. We go into line behind the whole country. So we have a project, but our project is part of the, you know, long line of projects. And she even mentioned at that time the problems with the Western North Carolina and the, you know, all the flooding there, that this is probably going to be something that the watershed project is going to have to deal with. And that was before Milton. That was after Helene, but before Milton. So there's going to be a lot of projects that are going to be really necessary quite quickly and also much more high profile than our own. So that's a concern. And she said there were no guarantees, although Anne emphasized that we had been declared eligible for the project. So who knows? Anyway, they did not, we asked the question about whether we had done the planning and then presented it to them. Would that be, would put us in a better position? And she said, no, that if we had done planning, they would have to redo the planning. So it really didn't matter. There was really nothing we could do to make ourselves more attractive as a project for them. It really was the project as it is, in line with everybody else. Anne suggested we contact the Corps of Engineers. Diane said she would keep us in mind. I'm not real, as you can tell, I'm not real hopeful about this project based on our conversations with them. I really think if we're behind projects from Western North Carolina, we've got some, you know, that's a competition to get watershed projects, considering that they are basically wiped out over there. Anyway, so that was where we were with the phone call. She did suggest, I think it was she that suggested that we contact Senator Coons's office, or Gail has done that. Well, she's contacted them. She hasn't heard back from them yet about working as a liaison there. The only thing is, seems to me like if these decisions are being made at the federal level, that there should be more emphasis, there should be more ability of a congressperson or a senator to influence those decisions than we thought maybe before. You know, that if we are in line in the watershed project national office, I think that might be a way. If Senator Coons's office can help us there, that would be a good thing. It would be more helpful to us than going through Diane, for instance, because I don't think Diane really has any say about what gets decided. Didn't you have that impression?
Mhm.
Yeah. Suzanne, didn't you have that impression there? Yeah.
I mean, the administrative people don't
Yeah.
allocate the funds, the legislature does that.
Right, yeah. But I thought maybe they had been awarded a certain amount of money from the state and now they were allocating it. That's not the case. We are getting the money from the federal government, or we're not getting it. Anyway, now I wasn't at this meeting, but there was a meeting soon after that with some representatives of DENREC. And it's my understanding that meeting went well. Suzanne started telling me about it, but I know, Tim, you were there as well, right? Can you, yes? Do you remember?
Yes,
Yeah.
Is that the outside one down by
Yeah.
our house?
that was one.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe you could give us a rundown, for Suzanne or whoever was at the meeting, give a rundown of how that meeting went.
So feel free to jump in case I miss anything. But so the fire company, or myself from the fire company, the Newcastle City, the building official, city administrator, and two reps from Public Works, and President Souter had met with two gentlemen from DENREC, who basically know the system inside and out, with the dikes. so there were some things that, because of some newer faces, they just wanted to bring everybody up to speed, on what, has occurred, with a couple of the dikes with, I don't want to say minor problems, but, just some maintenance issues that need to be addressed.
Did they talk about the problem with the broad dike and that getting clogged up all the time?
So they did touch on that, and it has to, there's actually a protector around it, so there's technically two dikes there. There's the older version, and then there's the newer version. The taller one that you see is the newer version, one. There's actually I don't, for lack of better terms, a screen wiring, around that to allow larger debris from getting in.
So that's
it
actually
has
what we
to-
were talking about though, wasn't it? Like a cage around there, or you're saying?
Yeah,
We
okay,
went and looked at it.
It already
Yes,
has that there.
yes,
So
there is.
the downfall is that the cage has to sustain, unfortunately, a person to get in there in case something gets clogged. So it had to be big enough for an individual, an average individual, not my size individual, to be able to make access in there and be able to clear any blockage. And you can obviously see, on the Route 9 or Newcastle Avenue side, you can actually see the cage. On the Delaware River side, if depending upon the tide, you can either see the cage or can't see the cage. But so the cage has to be big enough to allow for the debris from like the marsh reeds and stuff that die off in order to pass through and not get clogged. So that was one of the,
Wonder if there's such a
main-
thing as an alarm that would go off. if
so
it's
there,
clogged.
so
Oh, okay.
they talked about the alarm. Do you want to touch on the alarm? I don't know.
You
if
could
it's-
go. It's
Okay,
okay.
I just don't want to.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
I don't want to overstep.
Yeah, you're fine.
You know, so,
Watch him.
there is, there is an alarm on it. The alarm is inactive right now, because of,
It was at the time, but we're getting it.
it's
Functioning.
it's getting it functioned. So,
So we have currently an alarm that's not working, is that what you're
So-
saying? How
so
long has that been
basically,
going on? that it's not been
basically
working?
it's I'll say manually monitored. So it's monitored by
Right,
humans, one being Jeff Bergstrom, and the other one, I forget the gentleman's name from Denver.
Yeah, I can't remember his last name. It's first
But
time.
he does it. The interesting part that I thought was very intriguing was, this individual from Denerac, it's not a duty that's assigned to his job description, to monitor. He takes that on himself,
mhm.
and he can adjust the gate on if a storm's coming, if there's a full moon or whatever else Mother Nature throws at us, stacked tides, like that kind of stuff. He'll look ahead and he'll adjust that. So that way what it'll do is it'll take, not all the water, but all the water that it's able to from, inside the dike, and basically drains it to its lowest point. And then he'll
To
close it.
prepare for a storm.
He's saying he's
prepare
going
for
to
it.
do this, or he's?
No, it occurs.
It-
It's
it-
always occurred that way.
Is what, I'm sorry?
It occurs that way every
Oh.
time there's a storm.
Oh,
And Jeff
Under
does,
receivables.
and Jeff does the same thing on our end. He monitors it, however he monitors it, but whether it's based upon storms or whatever, but he has a system down, that he'll monitor it, and if, and they can see like the level of the gate. So either Jeff will take the initiative to do it first, or this other guy would do it first. And basically they just drain it and come in. The interesting part is the water on the road, it is affected by that tidal gate. You know, So that tidal gate does obviously affect the water on the road. Now, there are some things that are in the very beginning stages, hopefully with Delta engineers, because where it comes on, that's a Delta thing. It's not a conservation district or anything like that. And what ends up happening, at least this last time, is they dig it out or they clean it and they just push it in and it just acts like a berm, so to speak. They don't actually haul what they dig out away. They just kind of push it in. So that doesn't help.
So they're
help
saying
matter
that they're
that.
gonna do this or that they have plans to do?
No, they.
That's what
they-
happened when
that's what
they,
happened.
When they fixed it
When
last
they-
Yeah.
They dug this little trench or clean out, whatever, and then instead of hauling it away, technically you can't haul wet stuff in the dump truck and drive it down the road. It's frowned upon, and I think it's
Hadn't
illegal.
thought about
It
that.
has to sit somewhere,
Right.
dry out before it can be hauled away.
So this
they
berm
just
is good
keep
or
it.
bad for us?
No, it's bad,
It's bad.
because they just leave it there, because they don't haul it away.
But I mean,
so-
what's the effect of that berm being there? If that's what's causing the water on the road? Is that what you're saying?
I would-
if it clogs
or
the
if it
system,
clogs,
yeah.
it doesn't help being there. But they can't haul it away. They just dig it to do what they have to do, and then they just leave it there.
So they
You
have
know,
plans to
it's-
hold it soon?
It's just like digging a hole or a trench and leaving the dirt right
because it
right
just
there.
fills back in.
But that was, I think that was basically the gist of that whole thing. And I know there's things that they're gonna work on, have some stuff put in place, have a secondary alarm where it's a visual alarm, just in case, because you know how technology is. Technology, it does fail, as we've noticed in the past here.
Is,
So there'll
Sorry, go
there'll be a light, I do believe, of some sort that we talked about, that it can be a visual thing if you know the gate's not working or something like that.
My
Just,
memory is that the stuff that they pile up there breaks off and falls into the water and drifts towards the river. The tide carries it. And Keith Wilson, the man from Public Works who actually cleaned it out the last time, said that once he got in there, he could see that the log that jammed the gate open didn't come from the river. It came from the inside, came from the marsh and drifted down and went in partway through the gate and got stuck and then jammed the gate open. So
And Public Works, every day, they, we have 3 dikes in the city: Buttonwood, Bull Hill, and then at the boat ramp. So he checks that every morning. He has a routine with it and all to make sure that it's.
and they also said that this one isn't, there's two gates at
Mhm.
Bull Hill. One from like the 1950s or early 60s, and then that white cinder block building that we see, that's the newer one.
Right, and then there's 2 different styles of
Right.
the gates are 2 different styles,
but they're
so
still both functioning.
they still both function, and the older gate has I forget the technical term, flapper that they call it, but it only goes so far. So instead of it, instead of it going like up and down the gate, it actually goes out, and it only goes so far. And also, that's the older style version.
But the gates at Buttonwood and by the boat ramp are self-regulating
Correct.
gates. They're newer. They're basically functioning okay. One of them needs a new gasket.
Correct.
And that's not a minor thing because it has to be custom made and it's
Yeah.
gonna cost thousands of dollars. But
Yeah, it has to be ordered.
yeah,
So the alarm is to let us know that stuff is jammed in there.
If the gate's working properly.
if
or
the
not.
gate doesn't close properly,
If it-
then the
okay.
alarm, which means
And
something's jammed.
That something's probably.
And that's why
jammed
we
in there.
monitor it too, in case there's a failure with it.
Right. We were just, is that where you were going?
I know where you're
We
going.
were just in Astoria, Oregon. We stopped there for lunch on our way someplace else. And Astoria is right where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean. So they get huge logs and that kind of stuff in there. So we're at this restaurant. We went outside before we went in. And there's this kind of weird thing with logs connected to each other. by really heavy chain. And it wrapped all the way around this restaurant. So as we were leaving the restaurant, we asked the guy, you know, at the restaurant, what's that for? And he said, before we had that there, we had these big logs that would float in from the ocean or down the river, whatever. It's also a big logging area, so sometimes some of those get lost, you know, and they got under the restaurant and they banged around and it was dangerous because it might knock out something.
Yeah, the
So-
restaurant was up on piling, so knock out a
Pilings, yeah.
piling, not a good thing.
Yeah, so they chain these just big logs like telephone pole kind of things. And there were like rocky areas, you know, riprap kind of stuff on either side. And they somehow connected the last chain. So it was just this row of logs that floated up and down. I'm sure it's tidal there. And he said it keeps most of the stuff out.
Sure,
Good
because it's
stuff.
floating on
It's a
top mostly, right?
real low cost kind of way to keep a lot of stuff out. And we were like, well, maybe that would work at the dike, you know, on Broad Creek, who knows?
Mm.
So just a kind of an interesting, you know, different way to look at it, because even though we have the screen there, it's not like screen, it's big
Well-
squares, like you
open,
said, there's still a lot of stuff that can get
Well, they
through.
talked about the balance. If you make it too small, then all the little stuff catches and it eventually clogs up. And then the stuff can't
But
plug.
something like
If you make
this,
it too big, then the big, you know,
Yeah.
logs this big get through and jam the gate. So they try to find a reasonable
a balance, but maybe the addition of something like this, I mean, it's not like it's really navigable or anything out here. I mean, a few people can get their little fishing boats or hunting boats out, but that's about it. You know, put that around it, it might keep some more of the stuff out.
Well, the things that are floating at the top will bounce off it and go on, if that's what you hope for, right?
Right.
Whereas if you're talking about a gate, you're talking about things that might be underneath and everything too. This will just keep
It would keep the
big
stuff
stuff
on
that
the
is,
top.
that's hanging, that is
Yeah.
floating down.
I don't think you have a lot that's floating very far underwater, cause there's not a lot of water
A lot
there,
of water there.
except at high tide.
True.
And even at high tide,
Yeah. What exactly is causing the flooding on Route 9?
It's, so Jeff had said that it's just the change in the tides is what Jeff said. So when you have, not your normal tides, but when you have your stacked tides or your full moons, you know, your tides that are higher than normal. And all, he says it just, unfortunately, it just takes time to do its cycle to, you know, to work and all. So
the-
like,
The dike has to be adjusted for that, is that what you're saying, or not? Yeah?
well, they monitor it to do, so if they see like a storm's coming, they'll adjust it knowing that there's going to be high tides. Now, I know like some people might say, well, the water stays on the road multiple days, and that's true, you know what I mean? And I think without having documentation, as in without going out there and recording when stacked tides are, because sometimes, you know, you get these storms and you can have multiple stacked tides. So it doesn't allow the water to completely drain out because the tides are just, you know, they're stacked. So it takes a few days. So, but that was, because I specifically asked Jeff.
That water is
about
coming
that.
from the river though, is it?
Yes.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's not
Well,
rising up from
no, I
some
mean,
land waters or, you know, surface water.
now, you have runoff from the road, so that metal, so when you come, if you're heading towards Ferry Cutoff, you'll see with that they fixed that metal grate, it's concrete, and then a metal grate, and then, well, that's a drain. So
So it's coming up from the drain.
it's not foam, so water, you know, runs off and it goes in there.
Mhm.
they actually, ahead of a big storm, I've seen them they take water out of the marsh, they drain it out of the marsh. So that the marsh will be lower to take some of the rain and the runoff water and all, and be able to handle it and then get it into the river later.
if we could control that problem at Route 9, it would be a big deal. And when we were out in, Hoboken, they had these big cisterns, that they had everything. Now, I handed out this article, from the New York Times, talking about three views of the water, what you can do for flooding. And the first one is fight the water, and that's where you put up, berms and you put up walls, against the river and something that they said that really struck me, though. They said, well, this is what you have to do then again and again and again as the water rises. The second thing is live with it. And I'm wondering if there isn't it's also this article that I sent to everybody about, the UK changing some ground back into marshes. That is there some way that we can have some kind of retention of water? There's a lot of land around there. That's why I also put this map here around that of the dike, including, I don't know, which side do you live on Bull Hill? Are you on the riverside or the other side?
Other side.
Well, behind there is that field, that meadow. That's empty. There are places of Ferry Cutoff, where they had medical offices. I don't think they're open anymore. I don't think there's anything going on over there anymore.
Dialysis centers open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is.
Yes,
Yeah.
Dialysis, yeah.
But anyway, it seems to me there are places where we could have the water go rather than Route 9. It's just something that's.
And I completely understand,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, it's a touchy issue, because you can't really touch wetlands. Like wetlands are.
Well, I'm
there
saying
for-
expand the wetlands.
Okay, I understand.
how do you get the water to go there?
We have to do some engineering of, how did
Yeah,
Augustus
you
get the
need
water
money
to
for that.
Rome from the top of the mountain, yep. Yeah, there's money involved.
Is that a recommended practice,
Yeah.
Emily?
Well,
I would think.
but you know what? Changing it back into wetlands would be less expensive than putting a big cistern in or something, This one, it's a bigger version of what they put over here by the parking lot, where they have an area that's sinks in the water from the parking lot. Do you know what I'm talking about, Fred?
Yeah, whereabouts?
Right at the bottom.
The
before you
parking
get
lot,
into
this is Third Street, okay?
Okay.
Parking lot is here. There's an area over here that is basically, a sponge for the water that might come off the parking
Right.
lot. So I was thinking something along those, it's just, it's,
It goes in that sponge and then it feeds into a huge tube that runs out into the river.
right. Yeah, well, this would be bigger and it would be,
Right,
it
so
would
you'd
be
have
a
to- you'd have
permanent
to have
kind of.
piping, like
That takes it
3 inch
somewhere.
in diameter piping that goes from wherever you're talking about back out in the river.
Well,
do
perhaps
the
this
same
would go
thing, that's
back
what that
through
is.
the dike, I don't know. I'm not an engineer, and it's just
That's
something that's.
gravity fed, what you're talking about there.
Yeah, gravity, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and well, the third thing is pack your bags. We're not doing that, obviously, so,
I'm glad.
but anyway, I just, this is something we saw in Hoboken that's been in my mind. I've never seen it, that there's some place to put this water until the emergency is over and then it goes away or,
Yeah.
Anyway, they're doing this in the UK. They were constantly flooding. So they changed a lot of the stuff that they had long ago turned into, agriculture land back into wetlands. And they're seeing a revival of, wildlife and everything as well, but they're also seeing a lot fewer floods. So it's just something that I came across here.
We need to stop building so much too.
Yeah.
We need
Yeah.
to leave our open land open, and I don't mean just Newcastle, I mean everywhere,
Yeah, you're right.
we
You're
really
right.
need to
Well, a lot of
stop.
the flooding problems are building above us, on the rivers, where the water now has no place to go, where it would spread out above us. But now it all goes into the river and it comes down and floods. So anyway, okay, so this is discussion of strategies we're taking on smaller projects. It seems to me like there are 3 projects that are on most people's minds, and one is Route 9, where Three Seasons Pizza is, you know, what we were just talking about. There's also Route 9 going the other way out of the city, which is constantly flooding. And the third one I thought is the Strand, which is, you know, those people who live on the Strand their backyards are constantly with water. And those are the three things that I think if we're not going to do a huge project right away, we might be able to concentrate on one or two or all three. Does anybody have any other? And also, Harmony and Sixth Street is also wet a lot. And Harmony and Fifth Street, that area there, Fourth Street, right, that sort of basin there, where Harmony ends at Sixth. It's been a problem for a long time, I know. That's the one where, a woman came over to me and said that her yard was so wet that, I forget it was coming down from somebody else's yard. It was just constant. And that's the first thing, remember that, Nancy,
Tony,
what's her face?
Tony.
Yeah, she said at our first meeting. So these are things that we could handle while we're searching for funding for a larger project is what I'm proposing. Does anybody have any other projects that you think might be useful? I think those are the pretty obvious ones, right? Yeah. Emily, you were gonna take a look at the next thing is strategies for looking at other funding sources. You said that you were gonna do some research in that, and you said that you did, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, I looked in a couple different funding sources that are available, and I did check out NOAA. They fund some larger projects, like sometimes they have larger pots of money. Right now their funding cycle's over, but doing a little more research, it seemed like they're mainly trying to promote nature-based projects, which would be things more like living shorelines and probably not something like large dike construction. So probably not the best source. The FEMA funding has some larger pots of money. They're building resilient infrastructure and
Excuse
community.
me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the living shoreline is all along the battery. And that's
Yeah.
not high enough.
If
It
you,
floods battery every once in a while. I mean, we put new drainage in, but the water's coming up, you know, so we get money to augment what we have there, be helpful.
yeah, so if you're looking for funding for a project like that,
Mhm.
sometimes NOAA has funding available. It seems like it's not like a regular funding cycle. So they'll get large pots of money and they'll have an open call, but I didn't see anything available at this time. But if there's a future project, you know, we can keep an eye on that funding source and see when it's available again. FEMA has good, consistent funding programs that come out every year, have clear guidance and funding available. The flood.
Is there a specific time during the year that they come up?
I have to remember when when it closes. I think it's usually like in the early fall it closes for submissions, and then, you know, it'll be around again the next year. The way these programs work though is that you can't submit them like just as a community. You have to go through your state liaison, I guess. So you'd work with your state liaison. I can get more details on exactly who that person would be in Delaware and like how you connect with them.
So if it's the flood program,
Yeah.
coordinator, I'm certainly in touch with that person.
Okay, yeah.
So we can connect. On that.
Yeah, so they would, like, you would be one of the programs that they would sponsor for the state. And they have a couple of grant programs that might be applicable. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program is one, but the bigger pot of money and where they're putting a lot of emphasis is they call it the BRIC program, BRIC, Building
I've heard of that.
Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. And they're interested in funding like large projects that are, you know, community-wide or region-wide, things like that. So some of their older funding programs, which are still around, we're doing things like a building elevation or like a dozen building elevations or, you know, things a little smaller scale. So the BRIC is probably something that's more in line with the size of the project that you're looking for. I know I was reading through, since the last meeting, I was reading through a lot of the reports that have been put together and the information, and I saw some notes that made it sound like it would be challenging for your project to get a benefit cost ratio above 1. There was some notes on one of the earlier projects that said when you're raising the dikes to, what are they at now? 10 or something, 9,
I think
whatever.
they're 9.
8.5.
8.5. So there was
9.
some analysis done for the BCA at 8.5, and they said like that was, met the requirements, but if you go higher, the notes in the report said they didn't think that it might not meet that benefit cost ratio. So what happens is the way the ratio is figured out is that they calculate the annualized benefits of whatever your project is. So it's calculated as losses avoided. So if you had a structure that flooded frequently and, like every couple of years or something like that, and the frequency was like a 10-year event, let's say, and you build something to avoid those losses, you would be avoiding a lot of losses, right? Because it's like happening fairly frequently. But if you have something that's built to a higher level, like 100-year or a 500-year level, those events happen less frequently. They cause a lot more damage when they happen, but they happen statistically less frequently. So the way the benefit cost ratio works is it's harder to get past that 1.0 when you're not just, but when you're mitigating against like a 100-year event or a 500-year. Usually the way that FEMA program works is it's often more cost beneficial for mitigating against more frequent events. So we don't have the analysis. I don't have the BCA. So you'd have to work through that process to see if it would pass 1.0, but that was a note of caution that I saw in some of the reports.
And what do they consider a structure? Is like a structure?
So probably what
an
you would-
actual structure, or can a structure be a roadway?
Yeah, can be a
a-
roadway.
Can a structure be people's backyards?
So the things that will count.
That constantly flood?
Yeah, so the things that would count for benefits are losses avoided of buildings getting flooded, so they calculate like how much the flooding costs for building the structure itself and the contents. And then they can count losses avoided for like business closing. You can count like loss of business income can be a loss avoided. You can also count if roads are closed and people have to like detour around and things, you can count like all this extra time that it takes people, or if there was a road that was flooded and it was like impassable, for some period of time, they can count those kind of losses. So you can count losses from roads being flooded, but your backyard, that wouldn't have a value in the FEMA benefit cost analysis structure they have. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're interested in pursuing that kind of funding, you'd have to look at that benefit cost and see if it was going to bring in enough benefits to outweigh the cost of the project. But the BRIC program would have kind of the funding levels that it would take to do a project like this. I also looked at the National Federal Wildlife Federation, NIFWF. They have National Coastal Resilience Funds, and I don't know as many details about that, but they do have, grant programs that we can look into for coastal resilience there as well.
What about the Army Corps of Engineers?
Yeah, that's not like I don't think that's a competitive, they don't have like grant funding,
No.
but you can talk to them and work with them to get a project initiated. They have a separate kind of benefit cost analysis that they do, and they have, community benefits that they count and things like that,
So they may come up with the money based on the need rather than every year coming through with a.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like a competitive grant program.
Right. Speaking of cost analysis, remember last week we were talking about the modeling study that was still in progress?
Yeah. There's a couple of questions on
I
that.
was thinking the same
There-
thing. Wasn't that supposed to feed into cost benefit analysis?
Yes, so there was one question you had about, can you count, like, do historic buildings count as something special in the HAZUS? And they don't explicitly have a way to consider the benefits of a historic building. What you could do is you could adjust like the replacement value, if you had some documentation, like it's, more money to replace a historic structure. I mean, I know they're like irreplaceable, so you have to find a way to value that, but you have to kind of like back end that in. And then I checked on the status of the HAZUS modeling. It's like in progress. It's supposed to wrap up the end of the calendar year. So that will provide some information on, yeah, like benefits.
Right, that's what I
Um,
was referring to. Gosh,
Thank you, Emily.
yes, thank you very much for that. So we've gotta, I think, look into those things more, coming up. I'll be happy to talk to someone at the Corps of Engineers if, somebody will. I think that, Gail had already spoken to someone, this is when we first started looking, at Denrac. Perhaps someone who wants to volunteer to look at NOAA, or FEMA? Anybody?
I'll look at FEMA with Emily and talk through that with her, and talk to, the state contact that I have as well.
Who, what, you were?
I'll talk to Emily and the contact at the state.
For the FEMA?
For the FEMA funding,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, okay,
Fred and I look at Noah.
okay,
Uh-huh.
okay. All right, I'll take Corps of Engineers. Okay. All right, other comments by task force members? Anybody have
So-
anything you want to talk about?
So earlier, when you, on the conference call with Diane Gray, if I understood correctly, there was something said about the planning portion of it. We don't have, technically, we don't have the planning part of it. I guess for clarification purposes, in the two things that were already done, put together. There was recommendations in there and stuff. What does that then consist of? Like, what is considered planning in their eyes?
Yeah.
Versus what we have after the study that was done and this study that's wrapping up now? I would venture to say that would be part of planning. So, and the reason why I ask, because if it's not, then obviously it takes more money. That, you know, it's more funding that we're gonna have to try to find somewhere on top of funding for, you know, in order to get, you know, to actually get things done. So obviously it delays longer because there'll be another study and like that kind of
I
stuff.
think
So
the planning they're talking about is more specific
Mhm.
planning.
So I think what's already been done is more like feasibility and determining what could potentially be done. And this work would be more project specific. So they made the recommendation of what we should do, how high we should raise, right? And then going forward and planning for how to go about doing that.
Okay.
I think that's more what
Well, what-
Diane.
I'm sorry, say that again?
So I think what the planning phase that Diane was more talking about was about what was actually selected. We would choose to raise everything, what, like 13 feet, I think it was, something like that, whatever it was selected for. And then planning on how to do that, not reevaluating the different options. I don't think.
Brian on the phone call, remember Brian said this was did not amount to planning, what we had ahead of it, in front of us, did not amount to planning, and that planning, would be a more involved process.
Right.
And that, but Diane or Ann actually said that, our doing planning beforehand would not be worth our while because they would have to redo the planning.
So whatever funding they allocate
Right.
for this would include
Yeah,
planning funding
so,
to an extent.
yeah, but obviously there's some planning and then engineering involved in, to do the smaller projects, there has to be some, process to decide what we do and then how to get to that point before we do the project, the construction. So what were you thinking about that?
no, I just wanted to kind of
Yeah,
clarify
yeah,
the planning portion of it, because I think in one of these studies that they had a section in there
I know,
about planning.
yeah.
So I wasn't sure. I just kind of wanted clarification.
yeah,
on it.
unfortunately, they didn't think that was planning enough and, well, I guess, or fortunately or unfortunately, because it doesn't really matter, because they will do their own planning.
Yeah, I took it to be more that they wanted to do it themselves.
Yeah,
As
right.
part of this
yes,
process.
Exactly, right, yeah. Okay, so, when Gail, next month, Gail will be here to talk a little bit more about her, contact with Senator Coon's office, and we'll go back to the drawing board about funding and, talk to the Corps of Engineers. Anyway, so,
Well, just keep in mind, if we want Kevin present.
yeah,
we're-
I was gonna say
we're gonna
that.
have to reach
By the way,
out a
Did you
couple
ever,
months to
did you ever get a chance to talk to,
Senator Poor.
Senator Poor?
No,
Yeah.
no, I didn't. I never followed up. I got busy and sidetracked
Okay,
with
sure.
some other stuff that.
Is this something
What's-
that you
what's
think
going on?
that you would be able to do between now and the next meeting, or should someone else?
I guess it's gonna depend on her and how busy with,
The election.
with budget, like, the
Okay.
budget's the big thing,
Yeah.
right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
that's like coming
Yeah.
up, so they're
Okay.
gonna have some crazy hours with that, if, you know, trying to balance that and that
Right.
kind of stuff, so, but yeah.
So next month, we will discuss what we've learned, from our various, forays into, funding again. And we'll have Gail be talking about her contacts with, Senator Coons. Is there anything else we should be doing right now that you can think of that, would get us to the forward, movement?
Just a comment about the 3 to 4 problems that you mentioned for smaller projects.
Mhm.
I don't think the Route 9 below Dobbinsville is a small project.
No,
No,
Denrick hasn't thought so.
huh?
Denrick hasn't thought so. They-
and the state, I
been
mean, they're all
years.
working on that,
Yeah,
right? So,
raising that road's not cheap.
Well, I
um,
guess what I meant was more control, smaller area. I understand that all these problems
You know,
have tough solutions. I know.
Route-
but
Route
you're
9
right,
to the
you're right,
north is
obviously.
more- Route 9 to the north is more containable, it's a.
Right,
It's easy,
out
but-
by Four Seasons. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's definitely
Yeah.
one that we should continue to look at and sort of tease out how we can make
How to do it.
that longer, better,
Mhm.
Route 9 below Dobbinsville, I think is already in progress, right? It's-
It made it onto Deldot's 5-year list.
Very good.
Yay,
Don't look at-
yay us,
Well,
right?
not though, that's for the road, not for the
Right,
problem.
Well, but to have the road adjusted to deal with the flooding. But before that, we had been talking 8 to 10 years out.
Yes,
So 5 years sounds like a long time, but it's still a big step forward.
It's a win, it may be a small one, but it's a win,
right. The Strand, I think at this point,
It's private property.
it's a lot of private property. Their yards get wet. I don't know that they're getting water in their basements at this point. I know when we were kids, we used to see the fire trucks go every so often and pump out basements on the Strand, so I haven't seen that in a long time. I just think.
Well,
from
I'm
a-
here as a representative of Gail. I know she's very keen on, because she says, last time she was here, she said her back had been flooded 4 times in the last 3 weeks or something like that.
A lot,
I know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it just seems to me like that's something that, it's not
But
gonna be, it's not gonna be as obvious to the population.
It's
as
not
Which
gonna
is
be.
what
If
you,
you're
what we
looking for a
kind of
small
want.
win,
Yeah,
publicize
yeah,
on. the
That's
roads are
not it.
Much more,
Yeah.
unfortunately,
everybody
Yeah.
sees the roads.
yeah. Harmony 4th to 6th, maybe. I haven't seen that flooded, really, not the way Route 9 at 3 Seasons
well, it's
is.
not obvious because it's in people's yards. And,
Oh, yours.
it's
Oh,
It's
yours.
along the drain there, along the
Yeah, like
road.
Third Street tapers on down, so like the middle of Fifth Street on Harmony, there's a drain, and if it plugs, you got a pool. But, I mean, they've been keeping the leaves out of there and everything, and that's why I was surprised at Nancy, because she's saying that it backed up in front of her. It didn't back up, it flowed down Fourth Street and then Harmony, past her house. But it all goes into that drain in the middle, it's right in front of Tommy, Freeburg's house.
Well, I was also thinking that, my wetlands would maybe take some of that away too, but, I got the, you know, I got,
Well,
that's with
it's
this little
hard to-
wetland thing.
Hard to fight gravity. I mean, if you fight gravity, it's a lot of money. But you're talking about changing topography somehow.
Right, right. Like, but if you make it low enough where it is, I mean, I
That's the
understand.
way to get the water there, yeah.
Yeah, but it's an engineering thing and I'm not an engineer, so,
And
yeah.
I remember Mike or Dave Athey saying, when this thing first started, that when they first dug those ditches in the, beyond 9,
Yeah.
the land was higher than the river. And now the river's coming up and it's higher than the land, at least at high tide and more so. And so if you dig out those ditches, you're letting the water in.
Mhm.
So the solution that worked 50 years ago doesn't work anymore.
You know, when they build new, construction, like, communities, not here, but like downstate or whatever, you always see that they have retention pond kind of things. And I wonder if some kind of idea like that incorporated into some of our open land might be.
That's kind of
A
what I was thinking,
possibility.
you know, rather than have a meadow, to have something that was a retention pond or a wetlands that would, you know, act like a sponge to take some of the water away from from the road or from the dike, you know, overflow from the dike.
Again,
Yeah,
you
the-
have
the
to have a
problem
drainage.
With the retention ponds, I mean, we have them out at, out by the farmer's market, property out there is several. And you have to keep them clean and the water has to go somewhere. It doesn't stay in there. You know, I think what you're looking at, Alice, is like when we went to, Hoboken.
Right.
I mean, those cisterns hold a lot of water and they hold it there till the storm's over and then they pump it out. We don't have anything like that around
You're
that
right.
I'm aware of.
You're right. It would just sit there. And
And
then
sit there
just wait
till
for
you
more,
have- yeah.
for more water to get into it.
Yeah.
We need a cistern. That's what we need. We need a cistern. Anyway. Okay, anything else on the agenda or anybody else has anything to add? All right, public comments?
Elbros 1301 13th Street. Sorry I wasn't able to make the last meeting, but I was out for a few weeks on the Trinidad, sailing down to Yorktown and different areas, but
Cool.
I'm back. So I'll start off with a suggestion for switching the tables, at least the center, to have you guys facing down there, and if there's a presentation, you can always switch the table down there. As far as I feel kind of like I repeat myself over and over like Groundhog Day about moratoriums on building. Every single committee or commission, one person from the committee or commission every month says, we got a problem, overbuilding. So they finally passed a moratorium, but like I told our city solicitor, he did not give full instructions by the law. He was supposed to let the commissioners and the voting parties know that it can be retroactive to any project that has not broken ground. This committee is the committee that kind of puts the fire under people's butt and different committees. You need to put a formal presentation together to ask for a total moratorium until you guys or the city resolves the flooding problem. It is a disaster waiting to happen if you build the 750 units. I'm still waiting for Mr. Bergstrom to get me an exact building count. But there's nowhere for anybody to go. Battery Park, the new system that was put in, like was said, it backwashes and it actually contributes. Because I don't say things for the sake of being an asshole. I just want you to know that. So with Battery Park, I've seen during mediocre rains, not crazy floods, where water's backed up and has come out the drain instead of draining into the river because of the river's height. So that's one of the things. The presentation as far as possible funding, that was detailed and spectacular. So thank you for going into that, because we gotta find funding. I know for a fact, Army Corps of Engineers, no money. State, no money. Federal, no money. I keep saying it month after month. This has been going on.
Thank you. That's 3 minutes. I would just like to clarify for the record, the moratorium that has been proposed by a council member was brought to the planning commission at their last meeting. They did make a recommendation to council, for council to approve that, but that has not been approved and is to be determined. It'll be on the next council agenda.
I also want to clarify something. We get in here, the room is situated the way it is done by the people who are here and for whatever reason that they do it. We do not have control over how it's set up.
Another thing to clarify, the water, if it's coming off the river back onto the battery, it's flowing over the top. It's not coming back into the, there's a manifold in the end that's like heavy rubber piece that faces out. So the water pressure coming out opens it. Until it has that, the water cannot come back in from the river. We changed that back, whatever it was, 2 or 3 years ago. It used to get clogged up all the time. Yay.
Okay, so, we will see you, next month. We're on the third Tuesday, third Tuesday, is that correct? We normally do the third Tuesday?
We normally do the third,
Okay,
right?
let me
But
just look at the schedule here.
some of us weren't around.
So,
Right, we did the fourth for a reason,
So next
but
month,
that would be the 19th of November.
so next month I may not be here. I get my shoulder surgery on the 11th.
Oh.
So if I'm feeling okay.
Well, good luck.
If I'm feeling okay,
What
I'll,
is sling
I'll be here, but they're not sure what they're gonna find once they get in there, so.
Okay.
So I
Replacement.
it may or may not be.
Okay, so our next meeting will be the 19th, and thank you all for coming. And is there a,
Make a motion, we adjourn.
okay, second?
Second,
All those in favor?
Great,
thank you.
so what kind of surgery are you having?
It
Rotator
is-
cuff?